In other news, Jim, you talk about in other news, the England elite player squad contracts got announced on Friday. Apparently it took until 4 p.m. to get it all agreed and signed off. But they announced 17 names on the list out of a possible 25. Some interesting selections in terms of the balance of 3 fly halves, 1 prop. From an outsider, Jim, being a Scotsman, what's your opinion of it and players that did or didn't get them? And how do you reckon it's gone down in camp?
Told you so. Did I not say central contracts around the corner?
They ain't central contracts. They're top-ups, James. They're basically guaranteeing, and the mechanics of it are, and I've done a bit of research, they're guaranteeing 150 grand to those 17 players. So 150 grand effectively is 12 match fees. And they get paid in different ways. They get paid a match fee of apparently 12.5 grand, and then image rights on top of that. I think ranges from about 8 to 10, 11 grand on top. So you still bag in 22, 23 grand a game. But what it does is it gives these 17 players the absolute confirmation that you're Steve's main guys, but also you're going to get guaranteed 12 match fees whether you play or not. And then they'll get topped up with their image rights if they play in the games. But it's a great thing to have. But what do you reckon inside of the camp and how it's gone down?
Well, it splits it, I would imagine, but it also shows you who's top of the tree, who's in favour, who's more valuable. Because again, I've done a little bit of research, like chatting to my agent who looks after a few players, and he was saying that there's still more to work through around commercial image rights and potential sponsorships. Like, where do they go through? Do they go through this player agreement? It's the fact that they've got 3 fly halves is a perfect example. You've got both Marcus Smith, Finn Smith, and George Ford have got one of these contracts. You've got the 2 hookers from Sarries and Jamie George and Theo Dam. Only 1 prop, like you said, like with Ellis Genge. So you'd think, well, I would think if I was to do it, you'd pick 25, 30 players across all positions. That would be the right logical way of doing it. So I don't know what they have in their mind. Is there something in their heads that think about the commercial viability of different players, or is it just based on who Steve will be guaranteed to have in their squad? But you wouldn't have the 3 fly halves in your squad at the same time. So I don't know what happens to the rest of the players. How much do they pay? Because we know that the England players would pay 20, 25 grand a game. If these are guaranteed X number of games at 12 grand a game, there's still a bit of detail to work through. And the fact that I'm waffling through, you've done a bit of research, I've done a bit of research, it's only just been formed. There's other commercial agreements to come in and to be filtered through. Like, how does ticket sales look? I've heard there's stuff around like jerseys being sold in the shop with, if you've got Marcus Smith or Finn Smith or Genge on the back, then you get a royalty for that. That's what they do in other sports as well, in the NBA and football. So as we do in rugby, we're very bitty. And we're very and ahhing, we're very 50-50, we're very not all in. So someone needs to come out and really explain what's happening, because there's a game next week. Is this in place for that, Andrew?
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And basically, effectively, it's the players, if you play in every test match, you learn the same as whether you've got a contract or not. So the players wanted parity and to make sure that no one was, you're not getting a guaranteed contract, but you're going to take less money for that guarantee. So there's no risk on a player side of earning less money. But a lot of it was around welfare, apparently, and around rest periods and commerciality. So they can now, from what I understand, bring in their own commercial deals in core time, as long as they don't compete with an RFU sponsor that's obviously paying the RFU rates to sponsor England directly. So it gives the players more power commercially to earn money in their busiest time and their most productive time in terms of eyes on them, which is international level, as we all know. So, but a lot of it was driven around the sort of player welfare side of it and rest periods, training periods, and not just having to play loads of games the whole time and having a seat at the table for that. So it's taken a long time to come up with. I know some people have worked very hard on it. Guy Bassell from that's representing the players now has worked tirelessly on it for months and months and months and months. And hopefully the fact that Steve can choose who he wants in that squad, and he's held back 8 contracts, hasn't he? That's a big thing someone like Finn Baxter, go and earn that contract. Go and have an amazing autumn and then get locked in on a 2 or 3 year deal for that. Because the other thing is, some guys are on 1 year contracts for it. Some guys are on 2 year contracts. Some guys are on 3 year contracts with it. So it's Steve being in control, which we know he loves. But also,
it's a great incentive, though.
It is.
Like, it's an incentive for the players,
Yeah, it is. But also, I have heard that it's split the camp a bit, as you said, Jim, and there's some unhappy people that haven't been offered one. But
who's unhappy? Who thinks they should?
I can't tell it. Me? No, I can't tell it.
Who are the lucky 17, Rob?
So you got Ollie Chesham, Tom Curry, Theo Dan, Ben Earl, Faye Bosso, George Ford, Tommy Freeman, George Furbank, Ellis Genge, Jamie George, Maro, Ollie Lawrence, George Martin, Alex Mitchell, Henry Slade, Finn Smith, and Marcus Smith.
All right. So out of that list, then, who do we think deserves one? Is maybe the question, because I think they all deserve one. I can't think of anyone else where I'm like, how have they not got one?
Yeah, you're right. And the difference is, some guys on that list would have been offered a 1 year deal, some would have been offered a 2 year, and some year a 3. But we don't know those details, right? So I think
it'd be good to know.
It would be great to know.
Who was thinking. I'll tell you now, Faye Boso's got
3. Yeah, at least 3. Like the big one for me, and the one that's made the biggest impact, is Henry Slade, right? Because if you rewind a year, Steve Borthwick didn't pick him to go to the World Cup, and so it shows to the players that actually go back to your club, as Henry Slade did, played exceptionally well for Exeter last season. Then he gets picked in the Six Nations, has a blinding Six Nations towards the back end especially, goes well on tour, and he gets a contract. The easy thing would have been to not give Henry Slade a contract, right? But obviously Steve now feels that he's a very important member of that squad. The whole 3 fly halves thing, I think, depending on how long George Ford's deal is, to have George, Finn, and Marcus on contracts, you might have a 1, 2, or a 3. Who knows what the balance is to that. But the 3 fly halves thing is an interesting talking point. But I think they all fully deserve them, to be fair. It's more so who's missed out. Like a Sam Underhill. Whenever he's fit, he's playing for England, and he's one of England's best players. He hasn't got one. I think you'd be pretty pissed off if you're him.
There you go. So there's one.
Yeah, you'd be pissed off. And I don't know if you are. Freddie Stewart, again, I know he only lost his jersey towards the back end of the Six Nations to George Furbank, but he's been a stalwart for England over the last 3 years, hasn't he? You'd be pissed off if you were him, I reckon. There'd be a few others in there that are pissed off as well. But like a Finn Baxter will come through and probably earn a contract. There's only one prop in Ellis Genge, and Finn Baxter went well over the Finn Baxter went well over the summer tour, didn't he? But Genji's obviously the first choice prop. There's no tight head in there because we've got Coley. Ultimately Trevor Davidson's got to come through and try and earn something, and Will Stewart's the other tight head in the squad, and he hasn't offered any of them a contract yet. For me, tight head is the second most important position on the field, probably, isn't it? Sometimes behind fly half, obviously.
Go and earn it, lads.
Yeah,
get out there. Go and earn it.
And you know what? This autumn, when you're playing the All Blacks, you're playing Australia, you're playing South Africa and Japan. You've got New Zealand and South Africa, where he'll really, want to see how players stand up. I expect us to beat Australia and Japan, but that is your great opportunity to go and play 3 of the big teams and earn a contract, and hopefully 8 more lads will get them after the autumn internationals.
I suppose the key thing here, lads, is do these contracts keep more players in England so that we avoid another Jack Willis off to Toulouse type situation?
Well, you think that is why they're doing it, to guarantee them more money, the incentive of playing for England, which we now know, if you're deciding to play in France in the top 14, then you won't be playing for England. I imagine Jack Willis, in fact, I know Jack Willis is getting paid more than anyone in this England team by staying in Toulouse. I think he signed a 4-year deal, and rightly so. So the financial incentive has to be there, because there's other players. There's a junior Kapoku lad, one of the Kapokus who's playing at Racing, who's been offered mega money to stay in Racing. The incentive to stay in France and go to Japan and do what a lot of the South African players do. There has to be a financial incentive. And I'm sure if you speak to some of the lads in this England setup and they know they've got that guaranteed money and the commercial upside and rev share of shirt sales and IP, then you potentially, if you're Maro Itoje, you're more likely to not consider going to France for more money.
Yeah. The interesting thing, Jim, will be as players come out of contract, right? And how much the clubs use it as a tool to beat down their club contract. Because like we said earlier, at what point is it not viable to produce English talent? So it's a real tipping point, isn't it? So will clubs try and use it as, well, you've got a 2-year deal on 150 grand guaranteed from England, so we're only going to offer you X, which might be 100 grand less than we might have offered you had you not had the contract. So time will tell how it works. And ultimately still there's different pillars in place for the players to be pulled in different directions, but it can only be a positive thing, I think, for the players to have more commercial say, more say in their welfare, but also guaranteed wedge up front.
Here's one thing for you that we haven't spoken about for a while. How much do we think a player should be paid? So if you're playing for England, say you're a starting lock for England, okay? A starting lock or a starting fly half, okay? One of the best teams, one of the richest unions in the world, playing in the Premiership, playing the Champions Cup, playing for England. So if we think we know that Jack Willis is on 750, 800, 850 euros, whatever the conversion of that is, just for playing for Toulouse, what do we think that conversion is of that same position? If it's 150 grand, is that what we think these contracts are worth, Andrew? About 150
Yeah, they are
grand?
150 grand, yeah. 12 match fees of 12.5 grand.
Okay, so if we go back, and excuse my math, Mrs. Goode, so are we thinking that in order for Ben Earl to earn the same as Jack Willis, very similar players, not a huge amount of difference in talent, that Sarries are going to have to pay him 650 effectively? Do we think that Ben Earl is worth 850? Because we know that these players aren't getting paid that. So if Jack Willis is getting that playing in Toulouse, how much do we think the likes of Maro Itoje, Ollie Chesham, George Martin, obviously Finn Smith's out of contract, we've spoken about it, Marcus Smith, because these other lads, the South African lads, I know they won the World Cup, they're £1 million players. They're getting paid millions of pounds to play rugby. So with this contract here, if they're to look after the England players, how do they get up to that £1 million mark? Forget the money in the Premiership. That's a story for other people. But internationally, we know the game's thriving. World Cups sold out. Six Nations is banging. Autumn Nation Series against especially the All Blacks in South Africa is going to be insane. Do you think we get to a point with this where it's like you've got the ability to earn £1 million, like Jack Willis probably close to doing that in Toulouse without playing for England, and as the South African lads are?
Yeah. My point on that is how many players are anywhere near £1 million in the world? There ain't many. So you've got 15 England players that start a game. Jack Willis, I don't think, from what I've heard, he's on 850,000 euros at Toulouse.
What do you think he's on?
I think he's signed for 600,000 euros. There or thereabouts. Okay. And maybe we're being facetious talking about it. But
I think we should. Every other sport talks about money.
Yeah.
Every other sport in the world talks about money.
Yeah, no, you're right. But then you look at 600,000 euros, and at the minute, if you're saying it's 600,000, at the minute...
You're saying that.
Well, yeah. At the minute, that's £500,000, right? So if you're... and he hasn't got to play for England. But what are your drivers? Are your drivers to get load of England caps? And with that comes load of cash and possible deals off the field. The reality of it for me is they're trying to protect from a player like Jack Willis just leaving, right? And Jack's obviously on, whether he's on 600,000 euros or 800,000 euros, he deserves it because he's a bloody good player. But there isn't that many opportunities around the world to earn that money. Unless you're in Japan or the odd contract in France. You'd be surprised what the contracts are in France. We hype them up a bit, but you'd actually be surprised that, I think Finn Russell's probably one of the only £1 million players, if he's still on £1 million at Bath, in the world. So where's...
I don't know if he's on £1 million.
No, but where's our talking point of... what is a great wage? And, understandably, with the game in the position it's in the Premiership, a Ben Earl's probably worth 400 grand to Sarries, plus you can earn another 150 in guarantees from England. That's 550. Plus then you've got every game another 10 or 12 grand to earn in image rights, which is another 120 grand. So all of a sudden you're talking about he's a 650 player. So yes, the guaranteed element of it is to try and motivate them to not look at deals in France, one-off deals for one-off players. You know, we're only saying the other day that Marcus Smith turned down nearly £1 million or whatever to go to Bristol's, right? So there is the odd opportunity out there, but it's not across the board. We're talking about the tiniest percentage of players. And ultimately, I think this is a good thing for the players to have guarantees, and hopefully 25 of them get that. And it helps with keeping them in the country and keeping the Premiership on the up.
Pod.
Rugby pod.